Did the ACC burn bridges with ESPN, put the future of their conference at risk by expanding and adding Stanford, Cal, and SMU? And could they have learned what not to do by just looking west to the Big 12 to see what they did 7 years ago? We're going to talk about that right after this word from my sponsor. Ladies and gentlemen, this episode is brought to you by Dutch Miller Automotive, where friends and family pricing means you get the best deal right up front on any new or pre-loved vehicle in stock every time. With brands like Chevrolet, Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, Ram, Kia, Hyundai, Ford, GMC, Buick, and Subaru, the Dutch Miller Automotive family is always growing and ready to put you in the car or truck you've been searching for. Check out our inventory across West Virginia at DutchMillerAuto.com or come in today to the home of friends and family pricing, only at a Dutch Miller Automotive store near you. What is up? Welcome in to another edition of Kuz's Corner. Come on in, belly yourself up to the bar, and let me pour you out this shot of top shelf college football content. On tap at Kuz's Corner today, we're going to touch on how ESPN may now be pissed off at the ACC, may not want to extend their media deal, and at the same time, it may have provided Florida State with a loophole to get out. And oh, by the way, had you been paying attention in 2016, the Big 12 kind of showed you what not to do, ACC, potentially. That's what we're going to talk about today. Before we get into it, if you're new here, you may see the West Virginia stuff behind me on my wall. Don't let that fool you. I do cover other topics. I cover conference expansion, conference realignment. I cover Big 12 topics, as well as my beloved Mountaineers. If any of that suits you, if any of that appeals to you, please hit the subscribe button. If you like this specific video, please hit the thumbs up button. Please drop a comment below and let me know what you think about this topic. Now let's move on. What gave me the idea for this video was a recent Twitter thread by someone named C.W. Lambert. Now, most of you know C.W. Lambert, or many of you may, and if you don't, he's someone who's always, or at least often, putting out tweets about conference realignment. He claims to have connections in high places. I'm not going to say whether he does or doesn't. I don't know. And he put out a tweet thread a couple of days ago regarding the ACC, ESPN, and Florida State, and how adding Stanford, Cal, and SMU to the conference may actually prevent the league from getting a new media deal, and thus could devalue the conference, and how it could create a loophole for Florida State to get out. Now, let's go ahead and pull this up. Now, I did send this tweet thread to a person I know who covers Florida State, a source I have over there. He confirmed most of it. Some of it he didn't 100% agree with, but most of it he said was spot on, and we'll talk about the part that he disagrees with, and I do too, by the way. But anyway, where this all starts at, just to give you some background here, we all know the ACC and Florida State are involved in a lawsuit with each other, right? Because Florida State's trying to get out of the Grant of Rights. They're trying to get out of the league so that they can get into the Big Ten or the SEC more than likely and make more money, okay, and be more competitive. Well, during their announcement that they were going to do this, the Florida State released information as to why they think they can get out of the Grant of Rights. And one of the things they talked about was something that nobody in the public knew, and that is this. Even though they signed a Grant of Rights through 2036, their media deal with ESPN actually expires in 2027. But ESPN has the option to extend that deal through 2036 if they choose. And according to Florida State, ACC Commissioner Jim Phillips made that decision on his own without getting a vote from the conference membership. And if that's true, they're using that as a way out of the Grant of Rights. That's just one of their arguments. And that's part of the argument Mr. Lambert is making here as well. And it's important background information to have when it comes to the expansion piece. But now here's the part that my source at Florida State didn't quite totally agree with, and it's this part. It says the ACC Grant of Rights is tied to the ESPN agreement. The ACC's Grant of Rights says rights are granted during the term which are reserved to the conference and the member institution under the ESPN agreement, end quote. I'm sure the ACC will argue otherwise, but the Grant of Rights is tied to the ESPN agreement. If ESPN doesn't exercise its option by February 2025, the TV contract with ESPN ends with the 2026 season, and the Grant of Rights ends with it. Now, I actually said this same thing in a previous video. I said, hey, if the TV deal ends in 2027 and there's no TV deal to tie the Grant of Rights to, then that may void the grant of rights. But after hearing what my source at Florida State had to say, I've changed my opinion on that, and I actually agree with him over what Lambert says here. According to my source at Florida State, it's his understanding that even if ESPN chooses not to extend this deal with the ACC could still take that to market to Fox or to Amazon or to Apple or someone else and try to get them to pick up the option from 2027 through 2036. And I think that makes sense because I do know that the grant of rights agreement and the TV deal between the conference and the network are two separate agreements. The grant of rights is what ties each individual school's media deal or media rights to the conference. The deal that the conference itself has with the TV networks or the broadcast networks is completely separate from that. So I actually am not sure I totally agree with Lambert on that part of this thread. But he goes on to say, FSU points out the lack of football media value of the new members is proven by Cal and Stanford agreeing to accept 23% of the normal share and SMU's agreeing to receive zero media revenue. So he's basically saying that they diluted the conference. He goes on to say the addition of Cal, Stanford, and SMU was clearly a desperation move by the ACC to give them sufficient numbers to satisfy contractual obligations with ESPN should FSU and Clemson leave. And now he's right on that one, I think. Clemson has talked about leaving. Florida State has been very loud and open about potentially trying to get out. I mean, they're filing a lawsuit to do it, for crying out loud, so it's obvious. But in order to backfill and to try to, I guess, be proactive instead of reactive, the ACC went out and added two schools from the dying pack and then one group of 5 school to the league in SMU. That way, if they drop below 14 teams, ESPN will have to continue their deal with them. Now, the reason that's the case is in their deal with ESPN, if the ACC drops below 14 members, ESPN could actually kill the deal. It basically would make the deal null and void, and they would have to go back to the table. And the ACC does not want that to happen because they know if they lose Florida State, Clemson, maybe UNC, whoever, they're not going to get much money. They're losing their big money schools at that point, right? Their most valued brands. So they don't want to have to go back to the table and renegotiate with ESPN or any other network for that matter without those teams. So at least by backfilling, they keep the number at 14 and ESPN has to honor their agreement with them. But now, according to Lambert, and I'm not going to read every one of these tweets, but according to Lambert, he says that ESPN was not consulted with before the ACC made this decision. And my source at Florida State confirmed that, and I think it may even be in the public documents released by Florida State. They're saying ESPN wasn't consulted by the conference before they decided to add these 3 schools. And we all know Florida State was one of the people against making this expansion move, right? It was them, North Carolina, and Clemson. The 3 schools that are more likely to leave were against it. Now, where the Big 12 comes into play here is this. In 2016, the Big 12 considered expansion. They actually had teams come in, do presentations, to basically give their pitch as to why they should be a member of the Big 12. It was basically a dog and pony show, basically. And the Big 12 ended up not even adding anyone. Well, according to Lambert here, he shared an article or a piece of an article from Sports Business Daily, and it gave us a reason why the Big 12 didn't expand in 2016. And here it is. He says, in 2016, Fox Sports president Eric Shanks warned that any expansion that devalued Big 12 football and triggered the Big 12's pro rata clause could wind up being fatal for the conference. And here's what Shanks said, and here is the clip from the article. It says, and I quote, and this is Fox president Eric Shanks at the time, "We don't think expansion into Big 12 is a good idea for the conference. We think it will be dilutive to the product in the short term. In the long term, it's probably harmful to the future of the conference." Now, I'm not going to read the rest of that because it's really irrelevant, but here's the key part there. We think it will be dilutive to the product in the short term, and in the long term, it's probably harmful to the future of the conference. Now, here's what Lambert has to say about that. Note the harmful to the future of the conference part. ESPN and Fox made it clear to the Big 12 if they added programs who didn't, at the very least, match the average media value of current members, they could forget about a contract extension in the future. It's foolish to think ESPN is happy with ACC expansion. The loss of FSU Clemson would be catastrophic to the ACC's media value, and the addition of Cal, Stanford, and SMU doesn't come close to making up the deficit. And the reason that is, now we got to backtrack here a minute. Remember, the ACC's agreement with ESPN, there's a pro rata clause. That means any school, or any Power 5 school anyway, that the ACC added, ESPN had to pay pro rata, which means they had to pay the conference for that school. So, for example, if the league's making $30 million, or if each team's making $30 million a year, then ESPN has to pay Stanford and Cal and SMU $30 million a year, or at least Stanford and Cal. Now, the conference doesn't have to pay them the full amount, which they're not, obviously, but ESPN still has to pay them the full amount. And if Stanford and Cal aren't bringing the ACC that kind of value, they're not bringing ESPN that kind of value, then it's dilutive to the conference, and it costs ESPN money. That's the whole point Lambert's trying to make here. And according to him, that's why Florida State has a legit case here. And that's why they'll end up getting out along with Clemson. And, the Big 12 decided not to expand in 2016, but the ACC went through with it. And if that pissed off ESPN, according to Lambert, then come 2027, when it's time to renew that media deal, actually they have to make a decision by 2025. When 2025 comes, ESPN's going to say, you know what? You added these teams when we didn't want you to. We're not extending your deal because we don't want to do business with you anymore. That's what he's saying they're risking here by making this move. Now, here's my opinion on this. I'm of the opinion that somebody in the room in the ACC, surely to goodness, was smart enough to know whether this was an additive or dilutive move. If not, they're idiots. Okay? And think about this. The ACC has the ACC network. That adds value for ESPN owns the ACC network, or at least part of it, right? That adds value to the ESPN and to the conference. Therefore, I'm of the opinion that bringing in Stanford and Cal, you're bringing in the San Francisco market, one of the largest markets in the country. It's a brand new market for them to get the ACC network in, which means they can charge higher carriage fees to carry the network in those markets, a very large market at that. So they can make money. It's very likely they could make money off of Stanford and Cal simply through the ACC network alone. And we all know the investment ESPN has made into the ACC network, and we all know that's the whole reason they extended the Grant of Rights deal to 2036 in the first place, because ESPN asked for that in order to agree to do an ACC network. It was part of the whole negotiation process. So I'm of the opinion that I don't think Stanford and Cal are dilutive to this conference. SMU may not even be dilutive. I would have a harder time arguing that one because of their Group of Five brand, but they're in Dallas-Fort Worth. And if you can get the ACC network in Dallas-Fort Worth, again, one of the top 10 media markets in the country, if not top 5, then maybe it is additive to ESPN. And maybe, just maybe, it was the right move for the ACC to make. It's not going to prevent Florida State from leaving. I don't think it'll prevent Clemson from leaving. It's probably not going to make them a whole lot more money on their next media deal. But what it will do is keep the ACC from dropping below 14 teams, and thus at least keep them at par with the Big 12 as far as their overall media value goes with ESPN and Fox. In this case, it's ESPN 100%. But I want you to let me know in the comment section, what do you think about this move? Do you think adding Stanford, Cal, and SMU was a bad idea for the ACC? And do you think Florida State's right here and that this provides them just one of many ways out of this Grant of Rights agreement with the ACC? I want to hear your opinion. I want to give a shout out right now to 4 of my VIP channel members: Outlaw of College Football, Luke Bart, Big Dan T, and Timbo. If you want to become a channel member, a VIP member like these folks, click the join button below. You can become a pub level member for $2.99 a month, or a club level member for $4.99 a month. Both come with perks. Obviously, the more you pay, the more perks you get. It's also an easy way you can support my work here. It's a way to donate to my channel, help me keep the lights on, and it's a way you can do it very easily. The money just comes out of your account every month. Also, don't forget to go check out my website, CougArsCorner.com. Got a lot of good blog articles up over there. Come check me out. And if you want to check out another video about Florida State, this time about whether there's actually a chance that Florida State could join the Big 12, check out this video right here. I appreciate you tuning in. Have a top shelf day and cue those country roads.